Today we're bringing you a Christmas special. Thanks to Oxo for asking Parker to paint this Harley model. It's a really cool design based around this holiday Harley special cover. In fact, I love this design so much that I actually made this cosplay a couple of years back. We printed this model at 220%, mostly on our mighty 8K and our M3 Max printers. If you want to know a bit more about prepping and priming your model ready for painting, go check out our dedicated video, it has some really helpful tips. But for now, let's get into some painting. We're first going to start with the skin. For base coating Harley's skin tone, he lays Quinacridone Magenta, Blue Violet and Titan Mars Pale on the wet palette. The wet palette helps to keep the paint ready to use throughout the process, as well as letting him easily adjust the shade as he applies to all areas. Parker first starts with her legs before moving on to her torso. You'll notice he's applying this with a couple of the bigger brushes from his collection to get an all over coverage nice and easily. So the top coat was a bit of an experiment. Parker was aiming for a very pale colour, so for the top coat he used his airbrush and thinned Titan Violet Pale with a small addition of muted Violet Liquitex ink. Parker uses gentle thin layers through his Gallery Mobius 0.3 airbrush to build up the desired skin tone. However, Parker always likes to check in with me during his painting and show me his progress. Usually I have no notes, but as the resident Harley Quinn expert, like seriously, I know my Harley. I wanted to stress to Parker that she doesn't just have pale skin, she has unnaturally pale skin. It's really pulling into some grey shades even, particularly in her new 52 era. Due to this, he created a new mix for her top coat, using thinned Titan Violet Pale in a larger ratio, and a very small amount of that muted violet ink, plus an addition of muted grey Liquitex ink. And Parker set to adjusting her shade. I felt it was important to keep all of this in the video to show you that not everything goes perfectly first time. We see a lot of people get quite stressed about mistakes and think it means they have to start over, but not always. Quite often you're nearly there and you just need to make some adjustments. Once he has finished applying the skin top coat, he mixes up an airbrush glaze to shade the skin tone. This includes airbrush thinner, airbrush medium, super matte medium, muted grey ink from Liquitex, and Paynes Grey ink from Rowney. He uses his airbrush to apply to shade places such as her back and around her abs. Next, he moves on to some further shading with his new pastels. Some of you may know he's been looking for some better pastels so he doesn't have to crush them up himself anymore, and also reliably know what colour he is using so that we can tell you guys in these videos. So a big thanks to a handful of people in our Discord community who recommended these pan pastels from Golden, and a special thank you to the member who kindly gifted him a set too. If you're for some reason still not in our Discord, check the description below for an invite and come chat with us. He also found these new applicator tools, which yes are again actually makeup tools, but he's found them really useful for applying to the right areas. Finally, he uses a makeup wedge sponge to finish blending in some colour. Since these pastels are soft and they're ready to apply, there's not a lot of loose pigment powder to brush off this time. Parker first starts with the red halves of her outfit. He lays Dioxazine Violet Deep, Pyrrole Red on his wet palette. You'll also notice he keeps a small dish of thinner next to his colours so that he can easily thin as he needs. He applies with an all-over coverage with his Raphael Kolinsky Sable size 6 brush. Firstly, he paints in her top and shorts before moving on to one of her boots. Next up, Parker paints the black sides of her outfit. For this, he uses black and raw umber. Parker always likes to say when you're painting black, you never just use black. Having this base coat mixed with the raw umber, it leaves room to use black for shading. Once he's finished with the top and shorts, he again moves on to Harley's boot. Parker opted to also mix and match the tongues, so whilst he has the black mixed, he gets the leg with the red boot back out and paints in the tongue of her boot. For this, he moves down to a size 4 brush. Now, can you believe we're on the second chapter of this video and we're yet to see Parker get out his beauty blender? So he gets out his beauty blender and he uses a larger ratio of the Pyrrole Red to coat the red parts of her outfit. This process helps to put some texture to the outfit as well as giving a brighter top coat to most of the piece, but it leaves some darker red shadows around the very edge of the clothing. Parker's method of painting highlights and shadows really reflects a comic book style that this model is going for. It's something I always enjoy seeing in Parker's work, as he likes to always paint in a way that reflects the source material for each model he's working on. Parker next moves on to the fur trim on Harley's outfit. For this, he uses Paynes Grey, light orange, Phthalo Green Blue, and a very generous amount of Titan Buff. This creates an off-white creamy colour, which he then applies with a brush. First around the top of her boots, before moving on to the fur around her top. Now Parker paints in the trim around the edge of her top. For this, he uses some of the existing colours on his palette and moves to a smaller brush to carefully line. Moving on to some more outfit details, and he mixes Quinacridone Magenta and Phthalo Green Yellow Liquitex Soft Body to make this grey mix. Yeah, colour mixing is well to me too. I don't understand it. Never would I think that these two colours are what you should choose to make a dark grey colour. Parker has a weird natural instinct for colours. I reckon I could point to any colour, ask him to mix it, and he'd nail it. Anyway, after the belt has an all-over coverage, he places some highlights with a lighter shade of the mix. He uses the same to highlight the line on the front of her top. On this black half of Harley's top, the star is red, so he uses the Pyrrole Red already on his palette to carefully paint within the sculpted detail. Switching back to the belt, and Parker now needs to do the spiked part. For this, he uses Paynes Grey, quite heavily diluted to make it more of a wash. Next up, Parker applies some shadows and highlights to the black side of her outfit. He starts by using a darker shade in the deeper crevices of the folds on her shorts, then a lighter shade of this mix for the very upper edge of the creases. Now that fur is looking a little dark, so Parker needs to get a top coat done with a much lighter mix using titanium white and Titan Buff, this time applying with a sponge all over the fur trims, mixing it up with some brush application too. Oh yeah, so he did the black tongue on her red boot earlier, so it's time to paint in the red tongue on the black boot. Whilst he's here, he also paints in the red diamonds on the side of her boot. As he moves on to the gloves, you'll notice we have made some changes. What do you guys think of his new mat? It's going to be easier to keep clean for new projects, and I feel like it's easier to see the model against compared to the black desk, but let us know what you think in the comments. So anyway, once he's put the gloves through the same process as the rest of Harley's outfit by switching between brush and sponge, he moves on to the hat. Her hat again follows this two-tone colour scheme. He carefully brush paints each side before also using the airbrush to apply some darker shadows. The sponge helps to add in some of that texture, and when loaded with a slightly lighter shade, is used to highlight areas of the hat. Switching back to the airbrush again helps to blend together all these layers. Parker has just a couple more details left to finish on his outfit, so he grabs his size 3 brush to paint in the front zip as well as the belt buckle. Parker's first step is to paint in her eyebrows and eyelashes, for which he uses Paynes Grey. To start working on her eyes, he first applies a base coat using Goth Skin Dipping Ink by Green Stuff World. This offers a blood vessel type colour to her eyes. For her lips, he uses Rubine Red Liquitex Ink and Crimson mixed with Blue Violet to create this purpley shade. again keeping it quite diluted. Oh yeah, and we also have another new feature. You'll spy in the corner now, we've now introduced palette cam, so you can see what paint mixing is going on over there. Thanks to a community member for the great suggestion. Anyway, I was telling you about the lips. So when Parker paints lips, he uses a lot of very thin and gently applied layers to build up to the desired colour. With her lips done, Parker now needs to paint in the whites of her eyes. For this, he uses his size 0 Gold Series Glinsky brush from Green Stuff World. The iris and pupil are sculpted into this model, which you may prefer, you may not, but it does on this occasion help with the unusual placement since she's looking back over her shoulder. For Harley's bright blue eyes, Parker lays some options. He places Paynes Grey, Cobalt Blue, and uses a mix of these as necessary. Now since she's looking over her shoulder, we maybe had the wrong camera on for this part, our bad, so let's just move on to Harley's hair. He first starts with the black side of her hair, laying Paynes Grey, Burnt Umber and Blue Violet. Oh, and yeah, his palette cam is gone again. This video is exposing how much I chop up his painting and move things into sections where I want them to be. Anyway, I did insert my input into this hair too. I really like how her new 52 look always has hair that's more like a really dark blue, so dark that it's nearly black. Like the highlights are always more blue tinged. Luckily, he had already picked up on this and had full intentions to go this direction already. After getting an all-over coverage with the brush, he then gets a smaller brush and creates a lighter shade of the same mix and starts to paint in some highlights. He uses this same mix to create some variety in shades of the hair by applying with his small sponge. You know he loves to switch up his tools, so he next creates an airbrush glaze with Paynes Grey ink from Rowney. This gentle glaze helps to blend together all the different tools used. For the red side of her hair, he lays Napthol Red Light and Medium Orange. He uses this mix to sponge onto the hair. For the airbrush glaze on this side of her hair, Park uses Napthol Crimson Liquitex Ink. Again, applying gentle thin layers to blend together the sponging. So Harley is getting there, but now it is time for some makeup. For this, Parker uses these 3 pan pastels, Paynes Grey, Magenta Extra Dark and Phthalo Blue Extra Dark. First uses Paynes Grey to create a smoky eye. He uses his new lip gloss brushes to help smudge in the colour. Next he uses the Magenta to create the red eyeshadow to contrast the black side of their hair. The Phthalo Blue goes on the other eye. With her makeup finished, Parker glues on the front sections of her hair, and here is Harley's finished face. So I've decided this hyena is Lou. If you don't know, Harley has 2 pet hyenas named Bud and Lou. And since Lou generally wears a green collar and this model has a green wreath around his neck, I decided this was Lou. After airbrushing with an all-over coverage using raw umber, he moves to a mix with his sponge. Oh, and another change you may have noticed, Parker's main brush has now turned into the Aventus from Gallery. Make sure you drop a sub as we'll be publishing our thoughts on its performance in a week or so. The sponge application is a mix of burnt umber and Naples yellow with some Titan buff present to adjust the shade as he moves into different areas. Next, Parker begins painting in the spots by switching between his brush and airbrush. On this model, the hyena spots are sculpted in, which is not particularly ideal for Parker. I think the texture it creates is a bit unusual, and when spots like this don't need to be perfect and uniform anyway, it's not really necessary, but I would love to know if it's the sort of thing any of you find helpful when painting, so leave a comment and let us know. With the spots painted in, he uses the sponge again to add some variety and colour to his fur. Now Parker needs to follow the same process for Lou's head. Next up is his Christmassy wreath around his neck. For this, Parker first base coats an all-over coverage of Phthalo Green Blue with the brush. Sticking to the Harley colour scheme, Parker opts to paint the bow half red and half black. We love a matching pet and owner. Going back to green, and Parker uses his sponge with permanent green to sponge on the top coat. The final little details on Lou are the cherries on his roof. For this, Park uses a smaller brush to carefully paint, opting for a size 0 brush from Green Stuff World. Now Parker moves on to the accessories, and we're starting with some of the presents. Oxo did a great job matching the inspiration image and mimicked all these presents and their wrapping paper patterns. For this one, he starts with a Quinacridone Magenta base coat, getting a nice bright present to work on. The green diamonds are painted in with permanent green using a brush. Moving on to this blue present, and he has it base coated with a mix of light phthalo blue and ultramarine blue. Again, Oxo has sculpted in all the detailing on these presents. I know everyone has their preference when it comes to things like this. Parker enjoys freehand in these sorts of things much more. However, I think beginners might find it helpful to have these details sculpted in. To paint the snowman, he uses Titan Violet Pale. He then uses Paynes Grey to outline the snowman, draw on his little arms, face and button details. Look at all these cute little guys. Next up is this present and Jack in the Box combo, or I guess I should say Harley in a box. He first base coats the bottom present using a mix of Mars Yellow and Permanent Yellow. Then he moves on to base coating the box, and he uses Dioxazine Violet Deep and Pyrrole Red on his wet palette to adjust the shade. For the black sections, he uses Raw Umber and Paynes Grey. The metal parts of the box use Raw Umber and a small amount of Paynes Grey for the base coat. Whilst this dries, he uses the red and black mixes again to paint in her outfit. I won't go through this too much as we have obviously just painted a much larger Harley, and this is going to use the same paints and techniques. What is probably more interesting to watch is his use of NMM for the metal trim, spring and handle on this box. Parker puts Mars Yellow and Permanent Yellow on his wet palette and begins building up the colours, varying the shades and painting in light reflections. If you want to see more of this style, do check out some of our other videos like the Jinx video. We also have a full gold NMM tutorial over on our Patreon. For Harley's collar and face, he uses Titan Violet with small addition of Paynes Grey. The final present on this base is definitely not a giant mallet. Nope, not at all. Who knows what it can be? Let's keep the surprise alive for Harley. He first base coats all over with Permanent Green. He then mixes a slightly darker shade using Permanent Green, Phthalo Green and Phthalo Green Yellow Liquitex Ink. To paint in the yellow stars on this wrapping paper, he mixes Yellow Oxide and Bismuth Vanadate Yellow. Again, these shapes are sculpted in, so he carefully paints within the lines. They take a couple of coats to get this vibrant yellow. The very final steps on this one are to paint in the snow using light phthalo blue and titanium white to match the reference image. Moving on to the final section now, Oxo have made us a pretty interesting base here with some details all around the edge. I will apologise now though that this section is a little incomplete. We've both been quite unwell this week, so concentration started to lapse at this stage and we didn't quite record everything. So to start, Parker works in the paved areas by mixing red oxide, Titan buff and some yellow oxide. He uses his brush to get full coverage. Next, Parker lays Phthalo Green Blue to mix with some of the red oxide already on his palette to create a shade of brown. Times like this, I'm glad you now have the wet palette so you can see some of this happening. It makes it easier for me to explain as he often just starts using paints already on his palette. Speaking of which, if you would like a better view of the palette cam, do let us know in the comments. We're considering recording it to its own feed so that we can zoom in and out a bit easier. After he's finished base coating the wooden edges of the base, he turns his attention back to the paved area. This time he uses his sponge and applies all over. For the eye sections, all this blue is done with cobalt blue with a small addition of titanium white. He uses titanium white Liquitex ink through his airbrush to blend out the snowy parts. As we get to this front part, he uses more of the Pyrrole Red and Dioxazine Violet mix to paint in the heart. This is a pretty big base, so it's tough to fit all in shot here. In fact, for some of the details on the front of this base, we really struggled to film properly. But he used much of the same shades of red we've seen already, and do feel welcome to hop in our Discord and ask us any questions if you wish. And with that, here is the final model. We have listed this one for sale, so check the description for the link. In the meantime, she'll be much appreciated on my shelf. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to all of our patrons on screen. We've been blown away by all of the support since starting our Patreon almost 6 months ago, and we could not continue making these videos without you. Catch you all in the next one.